Hey, this is a video for Wes. Hey man, you had asked, where to start on graphic score interpretation. So I remember I started doing some improvisation on tuba, sort of like free improvisation. I remember, I think it was my senior year of undergrad, I broke up with someone and I was super sad, so I used to sit in a practice room and I remember pushing all the valves down and going, because that's how I felt. Or going, oh my gosh, a minor scale with a flat 2 is the saddest thing I've ever heard. And I remember playing stuff like that and, starting to a little bit understand, what moods can be created by playing certain chords, or arpeggios, I guess in our case, or using certain scales, or playing, at certain tempos or ranges, however. But I wanted to explain sort of how I arrived at Infinite Jester. So as you see it, so our first clue and graphic scores sometimes come with instructions and sometimes have clues and sometimes have just like nothing at all. So for me it was the title first. So I knew of David Foster Wallace, book named An Infinite Jest, and I had sent a note to Bill Smith, and he told me that, it's kind of loosely based on that. Having not read the book, I kind of scanned all over and tried to figure out, okay, well, what is this book about? So one of the portions of the book that I sort of chose to kind of put my interpretation in is that there's this dystopian future, and this is a rather modern book, and in this future there is a video out there which is so funny. It's called The Entertainment, but it is so funny that if you watch it, you will continue to watch it and you will laugh so hard that you will die. So I kind of decided to start there. So what's nice about Bill's score here is that well, number one, just sort of based on this, you can kind of see there are what looks like 5 lines. So if you were kind of do that visually across, then you sort of have maybe an implied or an inferred staff, right? So that's where I started with that. We also have, what look like rhythmic values. The other thing, at least in terms of form, to my eye, I saw A, B, and A. So if we were to look at these 2 lines, especially starting here, so this looks like a mirror image of A, right? So as we move along here, that looks pretty similar, minus that stuff up there. And you go across, and up until about here, right? Then it looks about the same, and it changes over here, really. So if we were to kind of use very simple form, A, B, and A prime, right? Or, whatever, A, B, A coda, right? So that's kind of how I envisioned it, at least in my head a little bit, right? So what I did was I looked at some of the things that didn't look like notes. So we can look at this stuff up here, right? You kind of see it sort of peppered throughout and our lines over here. So, and then we have non-musical notation here, but a definite crescendo, right? So what I decided to do was to... over here we have this what looks like a little staff. So what I did was I chose to do like TV static here, right? And then because these notes are clustered on top of each other, I decided to use delay. If I was doing this without any effects, I would just I guess I would just play busier, or however, that would be a slightly different interpretation. But when I saw this, I thought, oh wow, this looks like with a delay pedal, I can totally make that effect come off. Up here, what I decided to do, and if you look throughout, there are those little blocks, is I decided to have a fair amount of laughing. Whoops, sorry about that. Laughing throughout, since that's what we were looking for. We're looking for that video that is so funny that will kill us. So I decided to have laughing throughout, especially like in here, and in here I also used sounds of channels changing, right? So, you know, I kind of made a decision that things that don't necessarily look like notes or, you know, or rhythms with no note heads, that those were going to be, get out of here, sorry about that, that those were going to be some sort of sound effect that I was going to use for my DJ machine. If not, and actually on the video I did down at Georgia College, at one point on my looper, I put my own sort of really high-pitched laughing and then looped that in there myself. But I digress. So, you know, I did my best to kind of start off like, right? Start off kind of low. And in terms of picking notes, you know, it was just sort of intuitive. You know, for some, like sometimes I may have picked an interval, you know, like these don't look like octaves to me. These look like fourths, maybe fifths, maybe thirds, right? Like I don't see any huge leaps, you know, except maybe, well, we'll talk about that in a second. So in here, so then I tried to give a little bit of space here in the playing, and then this was a busier area. This was not as busy, right? But there's a bit more layering, right? So I tried to delineate in terms of where I was playing. So you know, lower pitches versus higher pitches. I tried to follow any of the sort of rhythmic ideas, you know, of course that being faster to slower. You know, we have these little swoops that almost look like slurs, so I tried to do, you know, some slur up kind of things. In here, you know, if we were to call this our development section, if you will, you know, if this is our A, this is our A prime or A, you know, return of A, this would be sort of our development section. So this is where things got busier. This is where, you know, the delay got heavier. I used 2 different delay pedals when I was doing this. Here, of course, you know, sort of more sound effecty. Here I have that whammy pedal, which, you know, makes the octaves go higher. So, you know, I was trying to go high to low sort of throughout. And then over here, what I did was I decided to use, because, you know, these little sort of gray dots start to go away. We have more of these lines over here. So since I chose like these lines to be static, I decided to have static here and then increase the volume on the DJ machine. So for me, when I first looked at this, it looks a lot like notation, if you will. So there's everything is sort of shaped like rhythmic values or like notes within reason, you know, with, of course, our, you know, a few kind of gray dots here and there. So that's how I approach this one. So, and wow, this video is getting long. But if we were to look at, say, this piece, so I just found this on the internet. I just typed in graphic score. So this one, as you can see, it's called Voyage for Bassoon, right? So, you know, if you look at this and you go, oh my God, what the heck, right? So if I were to, say, decide to do Voyage for a bassoon, right? So so first looking at it, we have graph paper. So, you know, we've definitely ventured outside the realm of stuff that looks like music, right? So so the first place to always start, I think, is a title, right? So Voyage, right? So what does Voyage mean, right? If we were to give a general impression of this picture, right, it's very linear, it looks very explosive, there's not a lot of smooth lines in it, so nothing I would play would be smooth, or, you know, I would probably do a lot of rips up and down if I were doing it without effects. With effects, the effects would be just going berserk, really, is what I'd want to do here. And then, you know, from there, you know, you take a look at it, and right, and you could theoretically, if you wanted, you could start at the left side of the page, and this, you know, this almost looks like something, right? And then here, this almost looks like a second something. So you could go that way. You could choose to interpret it from top to bottom or bottom to top. you could look at this as a picture, in just first blush, like just looking right at it, right? I see what looks like a right angle triangle, right? Here is this a face? Is that an eye with like some sort of like crescendo looking thing? But is it looking at something? Is it looking at the triangle? Because that almost looks like an eye, a nose. That could be like a neck. This could be an arm almost pointing at something, right? What is this? Is this another person? Is that a head? Is this sort of a big person? Is this a planet, right? That, we could almost view that as legs. You could go sort of the picture route, right? So what does that picture evoke, right? In terms of, starting, I mean, for me, I think I would do an overall impression. So my overall impression is that this seems like some sort of, fast-moving, explosive, sort of mathy, if you will. So, I'd probably, try and play like maybe some diminished scales, but, stuff that evokes, like a headier interpretation rather than a more heart interpretation, if that makes any sense at all. So in looking at this one, it would probably be more angular, I would sort of go from there, like I said, I've done a fair amount of improv. There's a group that I play with in town, and we've sort of changed names. I think it's called Broca now, and we just did an album of just totally free improvisations, and we actually just sort of looked at each other and then started playing. There are some groups that I've played with where they think of a mood or a word or like a scale or a key center, and we sort of go from there. One of the other groups I'm in, what we decided to do is we kind of picked out some key centers and then chose musical styles, and then had some sort of, and then we kind of decided, okay, well, who's gonna lead this, who's gonna start, how does it end, that kind of thing. In some groups, it's just like you just get out there and just do a bunch of stuff. And when you're out there, you use the same things you would in maybe a jazz setting. So, you use imitation, you kind of go back and forth, it's interesting because you can kind of decide, if you want to go with standard sounds out of your instruments or non-standard sounds. So it starts to get kind of way out. So I think I'm starting to babble, but I hope that kind of gives you a general idea of, one, how I started with Infinite Jester and sort of what it evoked for me, and then just throwing something up so you can get an idea of like, hey, that's something completely different, and maybe how someone would start with an interpretation of that. Cool. Let me know if you have any questions, and cool. Hope to talk to you soon, man.